Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I am going to actually start another new series of reading everything I can get my hands on by a favorite author, in this case Dean R. Koontz, who these days often goes as just Dean Koontz. He was born in 1945 on July 9th. Not sure where he was born. I don't have that in my notes. I'm sure if you look it up, you can find out. But he started his career, well, he started his career with his very first story as a horror story, but he quickly started publishing in the science fiction magazines. His second story was published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and he published quite a bit for fantasy and science fiction. He published a lot of stories in If magazine, edited by Frederick Pohl. And his fourth work was a whole novel called Star Quest, which was one of the ace doubles. And he was publishing science fiction. I believe he got a Hugo nomination. It was either Hugo or Nebula. So he was getting attention, and he was getting good attention. He was a well-liked author, which is kind of the opposite of Stephen King, who just collected rejection slips from the genre science fiction magazines. Dean Koontz was able to get in. Well, then, in the early 1970s, well, late 60s, early 70s, you had two things happen. You had Rosemary's Baby get published, which we're going to do a review on. Emily and I will be reviewing that very shortly. And then you had The Exorcist get published in the early 70s, and you had a lot of other, you had both of those get made as movies, which were blockbuster movies. And so you just had this explosion of horror films and horror novels getting done in the 1970s that just kept gaining momentum into the 1980s as a result of Stephen King and Dean Koontz publishing in the horror genre. Not sure what you would consider his first horror novel. I haven't read them all. Hell's Gate sounds like horror. That was published in 1970. His first one, which was really a combination science fiction and horror, his first one to really catapult him to fame was Demon Seed, published in 1973. And he very quickly went all into horror after that and became very famous as a horror writer. Now, my first and so far only exposure to Dean Koontz is his novel Intensity, which is somewhere back here, with a very beautiful graphic design to the cover, and it was an incredible novel, very much horror suspense thriller. I mean, it was horror, but it wasn't supernatural horror. It was serial killer horror, that kind of thing. So more of a thriller than a horror, I think. I don't know, but we tend to consider things like Silence of the Lambs to be horror stories, even though they're not traditional horror stories. It's not like Dracula or The Mummy or The Wolfman. Anyway, Dean Koontz then was arguably the number 2 horror writer for a very long time. It didn't hurt him any. He was selling a lot of books and getting a lot of attention and doing really well with his writing some amazing works. And he's still going today. I just got his latest. It's not in front of me. I just got a copy of his latest novel, Dark of the Forest or something like that. Sounds like a really good one. A horror novel, kind of werewolf sounding. So I've liked Dean Koontz, what little I've read, and of course I've seen movies based on his works, like Hideaway. I really like that. Phantoms, I really like that. So I've seen some of the movies based on his novels and really love those. And I just have a fascination. I mean, I've read a lot of King at this point. I only started reading King, I think, 3 years ago. And I've just come across one after another brilliant stories. I've read the one Dean Koontz novel, and it was right up there. One of the best novels I've read. So I decided especially since Dean Koontz was more of a traditional science fiction writer to begin with, I wanted to go back and read everything I can get my hands on in order of publication. And so I'm going back to what to the best of my knowledge is his very first published story. Published in May of 1966 in a magazine called Readers and Writers, which I've never heard of before. It's a short story titled Kittens. And Koontz collected that story in, I believe this is his only short story collection, Strange Highways. So I picked up a really nice copy of this and I read the story Kittens. So, what is Kittens about? You have a young girl named Marnie, and she's growing up in a very strictly religious family with, you know, nightly Bible readings, and you go to church and you follow the rules and don't bad talk God, don't use foul language, stuff like that. Except she has a pet cat, a female pet cat, who has litters of kittens about once a year. But always, after about 3 days, the kittens disappear. The explanation from her parents, God wanted them. And so they are now in heaven with God. Well, the cat has a new litter. Marnie follows her father out to the barn where the cat and her litter are at and sees her father drowning one by one all of the kittens. This causes a problem for her because you're not supposed to kill. It's against the law. It's against God's laws. I need to stop there. The ending of the story is very interesting, although you may be able to predict it at this point after what I've said. I thought the ending, I saw it coming way earlier, but I liked it just as much. Like I say, sometimes it's about how you get there, not about you know where you're going to end up with a story, but the fun of the story is getting there and seeing how it unfolds. And I think this is one of those. It's a very well written little story. It's a very short story, but very well written and great for a first time publication. So that was Dean Koontz's very first published work. And I do feel, like I say, I've only read Intensity and I know something about a lot of his other novels, but I'm not the expert yet on Dean Koontz, but I do feel this story is very much in line with what I expect to find as I go through and what I did find in like Intensity or Hideaway. Um, the kind of style, the kind of writing, the kind of imagination that I expect to find in all the rest of his horror works. I don't know what I'm going to get with his science fiction works. I'm looking forward to that. But Kittens was everything I expected a Dean Koontz short story to be. It delivered, and it was really good. I enjoyed it. So I recommend it to any of you that, not just people that like Dean Koontz, but also people who like Stephen King, people um, who like horror in general. This is a really good story, worth your time. It's just a little short story, so it's not going to take much time, but it's worth it. So seek it out and read it. And of course, if you have already read Kittens, I'm betting you read it in Strange Highways, because that magazine, it sounds pretty obscure. I didn't even try to find a copy of it. But anyway, if you have already read it, let me know what you think of this story in the comments for everybody to see. And otherwise, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and come back for the next Dean Koontz. It's going to be Soft Come the Dragons from August of 1967. So more than a year later before he publishes his next story, but it's in one of the top genre fiction magazines, fantasy and science fiction. So come on back and join me for that and all the rest of the Dean Koontz I'm going to cover, and all the rest of the authors and stories that I talk about in all the different videos of Telltale Books.